Told you to take that jacket off.
You'd have to kill me to get this jacket off. I don't want any trouble here.
Then I'll let you lead. What about the bar? Burn it down. I need you.
The Bikeriders is directed by Jeff Nichols, and it stars Tom Hardy, Austin Butler, and Jodie Comer, and the movie is based on a book of the same name, The Bikeriders, that was written by a photographer that actually followed around a group of bike riders in Chicago in the 60s and 70s, and while this group starts as more of a brotherhood group of guys that love riding motorcycles, they're just motorcycle enthusiasts, they like getting drunk together on the weekends, and they're like, let's start a motorcycle club, and it starts like that, it's wholesome, but then one thing leads to another, as it usually does when the story gets interesting, and bad things start to happen, more gang affiliated things start to happen, and by the end of the movie they go from being a motorcycle group of brothers to a full-on gang, and it leads to all kinds of problems. And if that sounds interesting to you, the movie is playing in theaters right now, and I would recommend you go check this movie out, if nothing else for the performances. I think those three main characters I talked about earlier give great performances yet again, and I recommend this movie to everybody who just enjoys film. Like if you like watching certain eras of film, 60s, 70s, highly recommend this movie. Let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. First positive I have, well, we just kind of talked about it, but it is the 60s and 70s era that this movie takes place in. I thought the outfits were done really well. I thought the look of this movie was done well, down to the detail on the bikes, the cars. There was never a moment in this movie where I was like, that looks out of place. Like I thought all the look of the 60s and 70s, the style of the 60s and 70s, even the way they talked to each other, the way they would make fun of each other, the things they would say to each other, that was very old school. It was very 60s, 70s, even 50s, bleeding into those different eras. And I thought that was really cool, really well done. And I love to watch it on a screen. Something about capturing the 60s and 70s on screen now that it's 2024 feels like it was so long ago, because it basically was, and so it's really cool to see those eras on the big screen. Next positive, I gotta talk about the performances. I told you Tom Hardy, Austin Butler, and Jodie Comer are in this movie, and those three are just fantastic actors, and I think all three of them bring their A game in this performance. Tom Hardy plays the leader of the Bikeriders, but ultimately, he just wants a motorcycle club. He just wants a brotherhood with a bunch of friends, and yeah, he's willing to get dirty and get his hands dirty. He'll beat people up. He's willing to give orders of even breaking people's legs or burning down bars, but this guy takes it very serious while he's also just trying to have a good time. Then you've got Austin Butler's character who loves riding a motorcycle to the point where he gets his foot damaged at a certain point of this movie and he may never be able to bike again, and all he's concerned about is being able to get back on that bike. He's not even concerned about his own health to the point where he's riding a bike in his cast. He loves riding a bike, and you believe that the performance they give is so great. And then you've got Jodie Comer, who honestly, before this performance, I'd only seen her in The Last Duel, and I thought she was fantastic in that movie as well. So getting into this movie, she tells the movie from her point of view, which is a bit of a negative later on I'll talk about, but I thought her performance was great as sort of a wife of one of the members of the Bikeriders who's giving her stories. You know, she's kind of cast aside by the other Bikeriders, but you can tell that Austin Butler's character really wants her to be a part of his life, a part of his love for motorcycles, and so she's always around, even if he's busy doing motorcycle club stuff. And finally, my last positive for this movie is going to be the grounded and gritty feel of this movie. It never feels too over the top. It never brings in all of these other gangs or has gang wars throughout. Like, there's some moments of violence in this movie, and sometimes there's not enough moments of violence in this movie, but this movie feels grounded. It feels like what they were going for was a motorcycle club and the atmosphere around the brotherhood of that club versus having a motorcycle club that's running drugs and guns and money and gambling like you would see in like a Sons of Anarchy show, or maybe if they were talking about a biker gang today. But because the movie is set in the 60s and 70s, they keep it grounded to that, and I liked that a lot. I loved the human approach to this movie, almost the love story between Austin Butler and Jodie Comer's character. I love that approach to this movie as well, because they very easily could have said, well, look, we want to be entertaining, we want shootouts, we want knife fights, we want gunfights, and there's really not a lot of that in this movie, and I really like that they did that because they kept it grounded. They made it more human feeling. Honestly, this seems like an Oscar bait movie all the way around. The fact that it was dropped in June, kind of surprising, other than the fact that they delayed it since last year, so maybe they just had to get it out. But I wouldn't be surprised if this was a movie that dropped in October or November for Oscar bait material. because that's what it felt like. And honestly, I loved the performances in this movie. I loved most of the storyline in this movie. And so if you were to tell me this was going to be a contender for the next year's Oscars, I would completely believe you. But since they dropped it in June, it just feels like a weird place to put it, kind of putting it between summer blockbusters. But with that said, I really did enjoy the grounded feel of this movie and that they didn't go too over the top when they were dealing with motorcycle club issues. That'll lead me to my negatives. My first negative for this movie is that while this movie is grounded and gritty, they tend to cut away from a lot of the violence. Like, you'd think there'd be more violence in this movie, especially when they talk about some of the violent things they're going to go do. There's a great moment in the trailer. It'll probably be the clip that I played before this review. So if you saw that already, there you go. But at one point, something happens to one of the bike riders, and it happens in a certain bar. And so they say, what are we supposed to do? And he goes, go make sure those guys can't walk again. And then they say, what about the bar? And he says, burn it down. Like, Tom Hardy's character is like, just, of course, we're going to burn this bar down because something bad happened to one of our members here. And it's a really great moment, and really kind of see the turning of Tom Hardy's character going from a motorcycle club sort of enthusiast guy to, no, we're a full-on street gang. Nobody's going to mess with us like this ever again. And I liked that. But then instead of seeing them get retribution on the people that did things to Austin Butler's character, you don't see that at all. They just move on. Like, it's implied, like, oh yeah, those guys probably are never able to walk again, but they never show you what happened. And I'm not saying there's no violence in this movie, because there's a fight or two that happen. There's a couple gunshots, things like that, but they really could have gone a little harder on the violence, and I think it would have helped this movie. Sort of like, okay, there's going to be a lot of references, I'm sure other reviewers are doing this as well, to movies like Goodfellas or movies like Casino, where you've got a very grounded story, but there's a lot of violence and you get to see that violence. And that's part of what I'm there for. So while I like the grounded, gritty approach to it, I put in my positives. But when it comes to the negative side of this movie, I think they could have gone a little harder on some of the violence. They could have shown you a little bit more of what this club was doing. Maybe that wasn't the approach the director wanted to take, but I think it would have made for a better movie. My next negative for this movie is that because it's told from Jodie Comer's character's point of view, you never feel like you're living with the bike riders. And the movie is called The Bikeriders, but really it could have been called The Bikeriders' Wife. And I'm not trashing Jodie Comer's performance, because again, it was in my positive, thought she was great. But just the fact that they showed it from her point of view, it felt like you were seeing the greatest hits according to one of their wives. Like you were just seeing the greatest hits of their lives. You weren't seeing them play out their lives. And it would have been better, I think, if you got to see them play out their lives, and maybe they didn't have enough run time in this movie in order to make that happen. But like, you hear that one of the bike riders is a truck driver, another one's an electrician, but you never see them outside of their motorcycle gear. There's like 1 or 2 moments where Tom Hardy's at his house, kind of brushing his kids away from the TV, but he's got a family, he's got a wife, he's got daughters, and you never see him really interact with them, versus he's always with the club, always doing stuff. But he has a full-time job as a truck driver that's got to take him away for a lot of time during the week, right? So why is he not doing that in this movie? And I'm not saying I want to watch a movie about a guy who's a truck driver and also a biker, but I'm saying that you didn't get to live with the characters, because again, the movie is told from Jodie Comer's character's point of view, the biker's wife point of view. So she's just like, oh yeah, and then this one time, what happened at this one place. And it just felt like it was choppy. It felt like I was jumping greatest hit of Motorcycle Club to greatest hit to greatest hit to greatest hit to tragedy to triumph, or whatever the end of the movie is. I'll let you decide how they end the movie. But my point is, I feel like they just jumped to greatest hits, and I feel like the movie could have been told more straightforward. And this is again going to be one of those references to a Scorsese film like Goodfellas or Casino, because that movie does sort of the same thing, where one main character tells the story throughout, and you're sort of seeing the biggest moments. However, usually you're following a De Niro, or you're following one of those other main characters, one of the people inside of the mob, so you're following their life. And again, where this movie fails is that it's someone outside of the club that's telling her story of it, and so she's going to have her opinions of it. And I feel like if it was more inside the motorcycle club or inside of the game, like you see in Scorsese movies like Casino or Goodfellas, you're actually getting to follow those members through the movie versus following one of the wives. Like, imagine if you watch Sharon Stone's point of view of Casino throughout that entire movie, you'd probably just see greatest hits of the Casino, and you wouldn't get to really delve into the characters. You wouldn't get to live with those characters. And that was a big problem for me, because that leads to my next negative, and that is that there's not really an emotional attachment because you were only seeing these greatest hits. They try to push this love story that I liked in the movie between Jodie Comer's character and Austin Butler's character, trying to really push the love story towards you toward the end of the movie. Like, it's really where the movie leaves off, is this love story between the two of them. And that's fine if that's the direction the director wanted to take, but it's just, I didn't feel that emotional connection to any of them because the character you spend the most time with is one of the bike riders' wives. So again, it's just sort of the way they told the story felt choppy. If I was to spend more time with some of these guys in the club, when tragedy strikes, and it does strike throughout this film, when tragedy strikes, I would feel it more. If I got to live with the motorcycle club or got to live with them and their family, or them, or maybe when they're just having a bad day as a trucker and you're like, wow, that's something I can relate to. I can relate to a human element. I can't relate to a guy on a bike going through his greatest hits of the movie told by somebody else's wife. Like, it's such a weird way of telling this story. And again, it just leads to a lack of emotional connection. Overall, I'll say this, I think The Bikeriders was worth watching once, and it's one of the better movies I've seen this year, but it's not a movie I think I'd go back to rewatch over and over and over again like I've done with some of Scorsese's classic gangster movies like a Casino or Goodfellas. Now, maybe I put the bar too high with those movies, but that's really what this movie felt like. It felt like it was trying to imitate one of those classic Scorsese films by the storytelling style, by what the story was, sort of a good guy turning bad, or a good group of men turning bad and just trying to make it through life, and they will have this one thing that they want to go for. So again, it kind of feels like it's imitating those Scorsese films, so that's why I set the bar where it is, and I just don't feel like it has the rewatchability. It's not a movie I'm going to be looking for on 4K immediately to throw on my shelves. But I'm not saying it's not theater worthy. I think you'd enjoy this one in the theater. I think you'd enjoy it just as much at home. I'm not saying to skip this movie entirely. I would definitely check it out for yourself because I think this is going to be a mixed bag. I think some people are going to love it. Some people are going to be on the fence with it. And that's kind of where I am. It's more on the fence. It's like, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It's fine. It was a good one watch. And that's kind of how I feel about it. But guys, those are just my opinions because that's my review for The Bikeriders. Guys, if you had a chance to see The Bikeriders yet, if you have, let me know in the comment section down below how you feel about it. Maybe we agree or disagree on some things. Maybe just overall you're like, this movie didn't work for me, or maybe it's your favorite movie of the year. I'd love to know all of that in the comment section down below. And finally, guys, if you like this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit that like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Bikeriders review, and I had a great time watching this movie. I watched it in a theater that was an AMC Classic, which just means they're not going to take care of it anymore, but it was a pretty empty auditorium. There was just like an old couple at the front, and it always makes me think about me and my wife, like, hey, one day we're going to be that old couple that just sees afternoon movies. Now I'm just the weird single. No, I'm not single. Well, my wife watches this, she could be like, what do you mean you're single? I didn't mean it like that. I'm going to leave it in. But I'm just that one guy that's alone at the theater. That's what I meant to say. But with that said, guys, if you like this and you want to check out more of the content on my channel, well, I've got all of my 2023 movie reviews right there. And I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.